Hey everybody, it's Joe from greenlightsound.com, and today we're going to take a look at the Burnley 73 preamp and EQ plugin from Sonimus, which is based upon the Neve 1073, probably one of the most famous EQ and preamps ever created. A little bit of background on the Neve 1073. It was first introduced on a console in 1970. It's a Class A solid state, which means no tubes, preamp, 3-band EQ, and filter. It remains a studio classic to this day and has been used on countless records over the past 50 years. It's known for its thick and warm tone, mostly due to the input and output transformers, which are kind of modeled here, and we'll look at that when we look at the preamp side of things. The Burnley 73 is a plug-in version of this classic piece of hardware which recreates the characteristic sound of each EQ band and the sound of both the line and mic inputs with this red knob right here. We'll look at that in a few minutes. The controls are very simple, and all 1073s have these same controls, so it's good to know them. You've got a high-pass filter with selectable frequencies, a low shelf with selectable frequencies, a mid-bell with selectable frequencies, a fixed frequency shelf on top. You've got your preamp knob here, and then just a clean trim at the end. One of the really cool things about 1073s and this style of plugin is the frequencies that are included on each band are really musical. When I say that, I mean when you select some of these, they're in the perfect spot for a lot of instruments you would traditionally want in a mix. So for example, if we take a look at the low shelf right here, we've got 35 hertz, 60 hertz, 110, and 220. 35 and 60 are great for kind of that sub and low end on bass and kick drum. 110 is a lot of that bass body. 220 is kind of like that guitar chug if you want some really low guitar sounds. Some lower mid bass frequencies, adding body to snare, all great frequencies to choose from. The bell filter right here, 360, this is a great frequency to cut out of a lot of sources or cut out of a mix. It's kind of that muddiness in the low mids. 700 hertz, you can push this in female vocals to get some body in there, or even cut a little bit. That's kind of a boxy frequency. 1.6K, that's great for adding some bite to guitars. 3.2 and 4.8K are great for vocal intelligibility, helping that vocal cut through the mix. That's where our ears are most sensitive, in that frequency range. That 7.2K adds a little bit shine on that upper mid-range, kind of pushing into the top end of things. And talking about shine in general, this 12K fixed band up here is great for adding high-end content to any source. A lot of people don't like this on a Neve because it can be kind of harsh on some plugins. I don't find it's the case in this one though. For saturation over here, we have our line saturation, which is on the right-hand side of the knob. That's more subtle. The left-hand side of the knob right here is your mic saturation. You can think of like 10 to 20 as moderate saturation. 20 to 40 range is getting more and more obvious. And when you're past the 40 range on this mic side, you're going into overdrive here. You're distorting things. You can disable the EQ side by clicking that button and use this as a saturation box all by itself. Got a phase button, which is really nice. Show labels shows the actual amount you're cutting and boosting on each knob. And that's about it for the controls, really easy. So the first source I'd like to hear it on is kick drum. I'm going to bypass the plugin first. Here's the kick drum by itself. And with this EQ engaged, you can see I did a high pass filter at 50, big boost at 60 hertz for that kick drum body, pushing 3.2K for a little bit of snap of the kick, tiny bit of shelf for that top end, and just a tiny bit of drive on the line side of things. Here it is with and without. I'll start with it off and engage this bypass on and off. Just adds that real good punch and low end to it. Great on that kick drum. Next source, we'll hear it on the snare drum. I high passed a little bit higher at 80 hertz. I'm pushing 110 for that snare body. I've got a little bit of attenuation at 700 hertz, pulling some of that mightiness out of the snare, getting some top end on that 12K, and now I'm pushing the mic side of things. It's going to be a little bit hotter saturation. Here it is without, and I'll turn it on and off. It sounds a little thin and papery with it off and adds a lot of body with it on. If I push this saturation, you'll really hear it come on. You can see how much that top shelf of 12K opens up the top end or pulls it back. Now we're going to check it out on bass. I've got a 50 hertz high pass filter here. I'm boosting a lot at 35 hertz, getting a lot of that low end of the bass. Pushing a little bit of 1.6K here, nothing's going on that top shelf, and pushing the line input a bit. I'll bypass it on and off, starting with it off. At 35 hertz really does add a lot to the bass, and you can see why. If I jump over to Plug-in Doctor, if I go to 35 hertz and we look at our EQ, when we push it, it's a big old boost there, very broad. Neve EQs, Neve 1073s are not surgical EQs at all. They're really broad. Even this mid bell, can move it around. You can see how big of a Q that is, how much bandwidth that has. That top shelf, really wide. I mean, that extends when I push that top shelf at 12K. 12K is all the way up here. Extends all the way down to below 1K. So a huge slope on that top end. Next, we're going to check it out on some guitars. I don't have the high pass filter on at all. I'm not really doing anything with the EQ. I'm actually going to bypass it completely and just use the saturation. On that line side, we really can thicken things up. I'll bypass it on and off, starting with it off first. We could, of course, push it into the mic side, get a lot more saturation out of it. Just really breaking things up, saturating nicely. Next, we're going to check it out on vocals. I'm not using any EQ at all. I'm just really pushing that preamp. I'm going to start with the bypassed and then engage.
I'm gonna need someone to fix my half a heart and stitch me up inside before I rip apart. I wonder where I'd be if I had you from the start. I really need someone. All that it left was half a heart.
You can really break it up again as you push it forward towards 60. You get a lot of distortion out of it. And finally, for distortion's sake, we're going to take a look on drums. I'm just going to push this saturation. Here it is bypassed. Listen to the kick drum, especially how it breaks up. So there it is, the Sonimus Burnley 73, a great Neve 1073 emulation. If you have any questions or comments, let me know in the comment section down below. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already so we can keep you in the loop as to what's coming up next, and I'll see you in the next one.